In our parliament, only 10% are women.
In my country, girls are sometimes married off before the age of 10.
Where I live, men and women don't have same opportunities for parental leave.
In my country, girls don't have the same educational opportunities as boys.
Where I live, women and men are still getting paid differently for doing the same jobs.
Women and girls make up 50% of society, and yet they own less than 20% of the world's land resources.
I want my daughter to have the same opportunities as her brother, and I don't want her to be afraid of anything.
Our feminist foreign policy has one aim: to make life better for women and for everyone. Everyone should have the same opportunities in life, be able to follow their dreams, realize their potential, participate in society and shape their own future. We need to ask, where are the women? We need to recognize the role of women in peace and in ending war. And we need to stand up to those who want to decide over women's bodies, to those who think women are a threat.
Because equality benefits everyone.
When women are free to work, educate themselves, and be free from violence.
We get societies that are healthier,
Safer,
and more prosperous.
For everyone.
All right. I think we are live after those introductory films from the residence of the Swedish ambassador in Jakarta. My name is Gustav Dahlin. I'm deputy head of mission at the embassy. And I'm really glad to see so many people here in the room. And also, even though I can't see you or how many you are, I'm supposing that there's a lot of people watching this online as well. So welcome to everyone. Selamat siang to those of you who are here in Jakarta or online, and selamat pagi to those who possibly join us from Sweden. So this is going to be one of the embassy's so-called democracy talks, the first one that we hold in a live offline session. Or version, or at least a hybrid format, because we have participation from Sweden online. This is a bit of a trial. We'll see how it works technically, but bear with us. We hope we can have a good discussion anyway, or thanks to those technical possibilities. So maybe let me first introduce our participants, two participants of this discussion, and then I'll come back to a bit of a background of what this is and why we're doing it. And so with me here live on stage is Dhyta Caturani, who I've in my introduction chosen to call a seasoned Indonesian activist, who has been working with human rights, gender and technology for a long time in Indonesia. And she is also the founder of the PurpleCode Collective. Thank you, Dhyta, so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all ours. And now for the technical challenge number one, we'll see if we also can bring in on the screen our participant from the early morning in Sweden, which is Nadja Dolata. whom I've also chosen to call a seasoned activist. You'll have to argue with me later if that's not correct. I don't know if we can see Nadja yet. I cannot see her on my screen. But I'm just going to count on that you're there, Nadja. Yes, there you are.
I'm here.
Right, glad to see that you're with us, and hopefully we can overcome the technical challenges of lagging sound and so on. I think it will be great. I call you a seasoned activist, but at least a veteran of the Swedish NGO movement or ecosystem, and now currently a policy specialist with digitalisation at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency called Sida. Welcome, both of you. We will get back to you to allow you to introduce yourself further and more fully and perhaps accurately. So I'll just say 2 words about why we're here. And we also the films that introduced the seminar about 1, the Swedish feminist foreign policy, and 2, the campaign of our MFA or our foreign service called the Drive for Democracy. And these are really 2 cornerstones of Swedish foreign policy, because the way we look at it and what's happening in the world around us and the solutions that are needed, these are 2 essential things to work with. The feminist foreign policy is, it's not that complicated really. It's about working with all fields of our foreign policy to allow for gender equality, for the same opportunities for girls and boys, women and men, with all fields, and to just based on the realization that this is not the case at the moment, and also because such equality is a right in its own, and also because it's such a waste worldwide not to make full use of half of humanity's potential. So that's quickly a background for the feminist foreign policy. I think we'll get back to that when we get into the discussion of today. But so the other pillar that we're building this on is a drive for democracy, which has sprung out of a realization that democracy in many ways, many parts of the world is backsliding or is under threat. So we feel from the Swedish side that this is something we need to work on continuously and actively through this drive for democracy. And as a part of that drive, we hold these democracy talks. All Swedish embassies abroad do variations of these. The way we do it here or have done it here in Jakarta is well, it's very simple. We invite 1 Indonesian knowledgeable guest and 1 Swedish knowledgeable guest to talk on a topic that is we feel essential to democracy, and also that is pertinent both in Sweden and Indonesia. And it's really important to emphasize that this is a talk, it's a discussion, it's the sharing of experiences and knowledge. It is not Sweden or the Swedish embassy or me coming to preach what we think is right or wrong in this regard. It's a matter of learning both ways. We think that we have experiences and knowledge to offer. We also think that we have a lot to gain by talking to our counterparts in the countries that we work, Indonesia in this case. So this is the 3rd democracy talk that we're holding. As I said, we've been doing one on press freedom and we've been doing one on sustainable business. And now the turn has come to women's rights online. Always a pertinent subject, but in Indonesia perhaps even more so with the recent passing of the sexual violence crimes law. Or however you want to translate it into English. So it's timely to have this discussion now, both based on that law and on other issues, to see what that does and what is happening around these issues in Indonesia and in Sweden and indeed globally. So that's the background of this talk. So I'll be moderating the discussion. I'll try to speak as little as I can myself, even though I've now spoken already for 10 minutes. I'm sorry about that. But it's really, we're here not to hear from me. We're here to hear from Dhyta and from Nadja, and also from you guys here in the room or you guys joining online. I think maybe when we have half an hour still to go or something like that, we'll open up for questions both from the floor here and online. And for those of you who are online, it's the same way it always works. There's the Q&A box. You can put your questions there. Someone will forward them to me, and we'll try to answer all the questions that come up. All right. But so I tried to introduce you both. I'm sure there are gaps to fill in that regard. So I would like now to hand over to Dhyta to maybe give a more full presentation of who you are and what you do and what your work is focused on. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for having me here, and hi Nadja. And thank you everyone for coming out here today in the busy and full of traffic Jakarta, and also during the pandemic. So my name is Dhyta Caturani. I'm a feminist activist and has been involved in the movement since the 90s. So yes, I'm old. I'm not young, as many of you here. And in 2015, I I involved and also initiated some initiative and also collectives during my activism days, even to this days. But in 2015, I realized that because not so many people talk about, the connection between gender or women and technology and human rights, I feel that the need to have that kind of space to be open up. So that's why I founded this PurpleCode Collective. It is basically a feminist organization that focuses on the intersectional issues of gender, human rights, and technology. Our mission is actually to open up spaces for conversation, to incubate ideas, and also collaboration, to build collaboration among women and non-binary people in order to build women leadership, network, and also solidarity, to challenge the dominant power and disrupt inequalities both in physical and also in digital spaces. It was only informally organized collective from 2015 to early this year, and we are finally registered. But we had carried out a lot of activities such as digital security training, especially for women, but we do also training for other gender, of course, as long as they're activists. And also feminist internet workshop. We've done that a lot as well. And OGBV workshop, and we recently opened a OGBV helpline since last year. We did researches, campaign, and advocacy on the aforementioned issues. I think that's about PurpleCode and me. But it also, maybe I need to mention this, that in recent months, I joined an organization. It's an international organization called Access Now, and Access Now is also got support from Sida as well.
Great, thank you so much for that, and thank you for getting the Sida support in there. We're always happy. We're always happy to brag about what Sweden does, but even happier when other people brag for us. So, but I'm glad there's a connection already between you and Sida. Maybe before I hand over to Nadja, if I give you sort of a warm-up question, in one sentence, in an ideal world, what would a feminist internet look like?
Okay, feminist internet, even if it's not in the ideal world, it is now that we need the feminist internet. It is an internet that enables resistance to challenge the oppressive power structures and to disrupt inequalities. That's a feminist internet for me.
Thank you. Very well put. Then I will turn our attention online again. See if we can get Nadja up on the screen. and I'll ask you to do the same, basically, that Dhyta did. Talk a bit more about yourself, what I missed in my short introduction, what you've been doing, and not least what you are doing currently at Sida.
Well, first of all, hi everyone, and good afternoon, and to those of you who are in Jakarta. Yes, so I came to this area of work in the 90s as well, so I've been around for a while, and I've come to it from the point of view of inequalities, gender inequalities, and that's where sort of my interest in different kind of power issues and equality issues between, of course, within gender, but also global inequalities and other intersections such as sexuality, race, ethnicity, and so forth. So that's sort of my starting point. And subsequently, I've worked in these issues in Sweden, but more internationally, sort of with the intersection in human rights, international development policy, both within the UN system, and then mostly within civil society organizations. So I've worked with a number of different sectors on these topics. I've worked with health, economic development issues, and I've also spent quite a bit of time with the global women's rights movement. And that's where I kind of came across and started to become more interested in the area of digitalization. And one of the reasons that you mentioned is around the situation around democracy globally today. And I think when we were working on women's rights, we saw very early on how the space for democracy was becoming smaller. So women's rights activists and queer activists saw these the sort of the violence and the different issues very early on. So this is something that I think women's rights activists and people who work in the area are very familiar with, and we notice it early on because many times it's more kind of controversial. Just being a woman and speaking out or raising your voice is often enough to spur a lot of different reactions, and not necessarily positive ones for the person who is speaking out. Anyway, and now I'm with Sida in the role as a policy specialist on digitalization, which means that I have a slightly broader remit. And Sida works, I think when I got this invitation to come here today, we discussed a lot around gender-based violence online, and Sida, I would say, come at this from 3 different angles. So we work with digitalization, where we're trying to increase access, and we're supporting digitalization to sort of reach more people in general. So there's like an economic development aspect to that. And then we also work on it from the point of view of democracy. And then Sida also supports largely actually within the sort of feminist foreign policy, gender equality organization. So a number of different women's rights and gender equality organizations that also do support to women's rights activists, and some of them who are working in technology. So I would say this is kind of the intersection of democracy, economic development and digitalization, and women's rights and gender rights. And we support a number of different partners. Access Now, you already mentioned, under our democracy strategy. But we also support organizations like GSMA, who works with mobile operators, for example. And we also support a number of human rights organizations that work with support to women's rights activists. So that's a little bit about me and what Sida does. And I think what kind of makes this area so interesting and important is that what we're seeing increasingly is how power, or the center of power in the world, has sort of shifted. I heard someone saying like that power center has shifted from sort of Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Was it power is shifting from economic man to Silicon Valley bro? And we can see this also in how some extreme wealth has been created in the area of digitalization today. And the sort of richest people in the world are most of them Americans, definitely sort of Western men who have been so influential and created so much of the online spaces that we're seeing today. I think that in itself is a big challenge to democracy, because it's a very small sort of subset of the humanity that is at the center of the creation of where we're spending our time online today. So that is a huge challenge. But if you flip it around and think about, you know, if the reality, much of the reality that we're spending our time online in today is created by such a small subsection of the world, imagine what it could be like if everyone else got involved. So if we apply a sort of feminist power analysis to digitalization, the digital world, and the sort of global economic systems that underpins that, you will see that even though it's sort of a new era, it's the same old structures and norms and inequalities that become or risk to become exacerbated during this digitalization process. So the hope and the great opportunity would then be to do this in a different way. How can we, and how are we engaging the feminist movements? How are they already doing this? And how can we expand that so that that part of the development becomes a larger part of everyone's realities when it comes to digital online and the development of the world in general. So that's a little bit of the larger picture and sort of where I'm coming from, where I'm seeing it.
Thank you so much, Nadja, for that introduction, and thank you both. I think I would like to start with picking up of sort of on what you said lastly here, and come, even though I'm by far no expert, but come with an hypothesis or two maybe, and it's that, I mean, you were talking about, Nadja, this shift of power from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, and you were also talking about sort of the promise of that, and it seems to me that take it back a few decades ago, that sense of promise was greater in all areas. I mean, everyone was very hopeful about what digitalization, what the internet would bring in terms of democracy and access to information, access to power, access to being able to share your thoughts and your words, and that seems to have not come fully into fruition. As you were saying, it seems that we're seeing more of a concentration of power, partly as a result of this. But so my hypothesis would be that this goes for the gender equality issue as well, and the women's rights of line. That there was great hope in the beginning what these new technologies and possibilities could actually bring, and that has maybe not really been the case. As you were saying, Nadja, we have the same sort of power structures still in place, and perhaps with even more force. So given the fact that you have both long been in the game, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because yeah, of course, that's an assumption that we've made and a reason for holding this discussion at all, that there is a big problem here, that these possibilities have not sort of delivered what they promised. Yeah, so if I maybe let Nadja have a go on that from sort of a global or a Swedish perspective, or which one you would prefer to take on, and then we'll let Dhyta come and comment from an Indonesian perspective. Nadja.
So about the kind of promise of digitalization. I mean, first to start, I'm really an optimist in this area. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be in this line of work if I didn't believe that the change was possible and that we were heading, that there's so much opportunity and potential in this. And I think it's true what you're saying. Some of the promises of what we saw around the Arab Spring, for example, didn't really develop in the trajectory that perhaps in the most sort of optimistic trajectory that we had foreseen. I think at the same time, so much has happened in this area and so many connections are being made and there's so many different, and there's so many important tools that facilitates networking and giving voice and power has come with the digital development. And I think the challenges that we are seeing globally today, I mean, not the least with the climate crisis, the opportunity and the possibility to resolve those issues, I think will rely or come out very, very much from digital innovation and digital solution. I think the digital gives us the possibility to do things exponentially. It has a completely different potential than the analog. And I think that that's going to be greatly important. So we're going to see, like, if we can create more sort of fertile ground everywhere, sort of can raise the bars from the bottom and try to I don't really want to call it democratize, but ensure that there's more injection of digital skills at the bottom line. I think that there's going to be much more potential and that more and more innovations and networks are going to grow. And from that, other things will be created. And with the digital, there's so many things already happening and going on. I think that we don't know what the future is going to look like. So we're sort of plunging into something that, you know, we can see certain things and you can follow development, and there are a lot of interesting examples, but we don't know what the future is going to look like. And that's why I also think it's really important to keep creating and keep using the imagination. And that's so not to become too derailed about the negative developments, but to believe in your own imagination, your own creativity, and continue to start creating that alternative reality or that complement, so that we don't get too caught up in all the threats and the risks. That's super important, and we need to do that work as well. But if that's all we're doing, then that's all the energy and the resources are going to be spent doing that. We need to kind of create something differently. And as we start and moving in that direction and create more and more of that and build larger networks and collaborate more, because we're not going to be able to do this on ourselves. We're going to have to collaborate, and we're going to see new partnerships and new actors. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting. But we need to create, and we need also the power and the resources to do that. And I think that's a big one, because power and resources are becoming increasingly clustered. And I think Sida has a really important role in this, for example. And it can be, you know, you can have a lot of mixed feelings of talking about investments and capital, but if you follow the capital investments, you can see quite clear paths to how the development of the world is going. So I think we really need to get the financial markets and structures into the conversation as well, because finance and capital has so much to do with how the development is going. So I think that's a really important part of it, and really see that money really creates things. And perhaps it's not so mystic. The development of the world isn't as mystic as we sometimes think. there's a lot of intentional efforts behind it, and that effort and intentions can be backed up with financial resources. So that needs to be highlighted and shifted. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yes, for now. I will come back to you though on that, because I think it was a lot of interesting things you said. But it's also, I'm glad to hear that you're hopeful still and optimistic, and also pointing to, you know, a few things concretely that need to be done. And let's get back to that later. But I'd like to pass the floor now to Dhyta as well to comment on the same question. Really, do you share the optimism? Are you also hopeful? And maybe also, since Nadja was mentioning resources, at least when we talk about the feminist foreign policy from the Swedish side, we tend to emphasize the 3 R's. So that's resources, rights, and representation. So if you look at the situation in Indonesia or globally, or what you like, when it comes to women's rights online, where has the most progress been made, and where are the biggest deficiencies? But you can start in whatever end you like, or answer whatever question you like. Over to you.
Yeah, that is actually not an easy question to answer, no? But I really like to pick up what Nadja said about power, right? And I completely agree, because there's also a book I that really mentioned that, this book called Coders. I don't remember the authors. Basically, he said that in the 1800s, people who understand law have power over the world, right? And then after that, again, like Nadja said, the Wall Street has the power, but now it is the Silicon Valley, right? And we are not saying that power is always have a negative definitions or meaning, no, right? But power that we now understand, that we now see the power by the few with a specific goals, right? Also only for the few. And we see how they operate. They operate by taking away our freedoms. They're taking away our rights. And they're exploiting us, or people, to make, as much profit as possible. And that's what we see with the technology now, right? We see the trends of, now we know, even though Nadja said, yeah, we don't know how the future looks like. Of course, we don't see, but we know that the digital technology will play the biggest role in our life. It's just inevitable, right? We know from the last decades, for example, how our life is slowly migrating from the physical space to the digital space. But then the pandemic happened. The pandemic really changed the pace. It's not something that we are not predicting before. It is predicted. It's just the pandemic accelerate, the phase how we migrate from physical life to digital, physical spaces to digital spaces. Yeah. But it's also now we see even the pandemic is not as bad, and people can resume to physical spaces, our activities, but it's not going to be the same as before. It's going to be this what they call new normal, like what we do now here, right? It's a hybrid way of life, and I'm sure that it's going to be continue like that, right? And also that it's not just in the way that people interact, but the way we live. Look at ourselves, look at all of our equipments that we have at home. All of them are digitals. All of them are connected to the internet. And in a near future, I always joke about it, but I'm also being serious about it actually, that in the near future, the old kind of refrigerators, for example, that is not connected to the internet will be more expensive than the smart refrigerators, right? Because for God, with this modern technology, you know, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and it makes our life easy. It is actually, we give up a lot. We give up our privacy, we give up our data, we give up our freedom, we give up our rights, right? Okay. It's, yeah. So so that's how power actually works on us. But then we can just see other example of how power operates over us through technology. You know, the shrinking civic spaces, right? Democracy is being threatened. What we imagined the internet would be when the internet first came, like in Indonesia, it was the mid 90s. Yeah, we saw this. Also, Nadja mentioned it. We imagine this, you know, a space that is more democratic, more open, more decentralized in term of power. But look at what we are now. No, actually, the power is now centralized. It's even more centralized in the hand of the few, but not only. Like we see the increasingly or the growing trend how government, especially in you know, more repressive countries, use technology to take away the freedom and the rights of the people. So I think this power that we see today, and it's getting worse, and unfortunately, and honestly speaking, to be frank, that many people in Indonesia especially hasn't really come to that terms, to understanding that, hey, with all of this technology that we use, there's a lot of people being pushed out of the equation. Women, for one, with all of these opportunities, but women with this technology during pandemic, especially, you know, women are being pushed out even more. Yeah, when people think that, oh, with technology we can fight for equalities for women's rights, it's actually, yes, it's on one hand it's true, but on the other hand we need to look at other, you know, groups of people, even women, because women are not the same. Like, I am a woman, some of you are women, but we are not the same, because we are not, we don't have a single identity, no. Our identities, you know, like, if you are a woman and you also have, you know, other kind of oppressed identities, you are getting even more pushed out. So I think that is, you know, if you ask me what progress, yes, we've seen a lot of progress, but we also see a lot of setbacks as well. So when this is what I always say, that we need to really make aware of ourselves as women or as men that have privilege, that have connection, you know, connected easily to the internet and use all of this digital technology. Remember that there are a lot of other women, LGBTIQ communities, people with disabilities, people with different race, you know, like Papua or Chinese descent, are being left behind. If we don't talk about collective power that include everyone within the technology and use the technology, then we cannot fight or we cannot challenge the oppressive dominant power structures that we are talking about today. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, I think it did. No, it answered a lot of questions and raised even more, perhaps, as good answers tend to do. So thank you so much, both. I tried to lead the conversation from that sort of almost theoretical overview into maybe some more concrete examples, because both in what you said, Dhyta, and also Nadja's optimistic picture painted earlier, there were hints of what can be done. And I would just like to highlight one very concrete thing that is being done and that we've been talking about here in the residence earlier today. And that's the initiative by Wikimedia in collaboration with the Swedish embassy here in Jakarta, as with many other embassies around the world, to hold what are called wiki gaps. Most people in the room are perhaps familiar with this. I don't know if everyone online are, so I'll try, and friends in the room might correct me later to introduce what this is. So it's essentially comes from the realization that yes, on the internet we don't have equal representation, and on one of the internet's greatest resources, Wikipedia, for all its many possibilities and all the access that it gives, we also don't have equal representation, in the sense that we don't have as many articles and entries about women. Women are left out, and their deeds and their achievements as well, then giving a skewed picture actually of how the world and how history has worked. And we don't have as many female contributors or editors and so on to this great resource. And well, to the credit then of Wikimedia, there's a great realization about this. And what the wiki gaps are about is to hold events where people are encouraged to essentially write more entries about women on Wikipedia. And that seems to me like a very good and concrete way of working with these issues. Of course, there are many others, and we'll probably get to them as well, that it doesn't address. But at least when it comes to representation, raising the awareness of the prominent role that many women are and have played, that has not been recognized before. So that's an well, you could argue that it's a quite simple way of addressing the problem, but it seems to me like it's very effective also to spread more information, also raise awareness of this persistent problem. So that would be one concrete way of working with this. So what I would like from both of you, maybe starting with Dhyta then, is to give a few more, if you can, concrete examples of what can and should be done.
I think there's a lot to be done. But here is one thing that I have been thinking a lot and actually also working on it, is that the technology that we have now, the way it is now, it's very gendered. Technology is never neutral, no? It's gendered, it has the biases of the developer. So if we want that the technology that we have now to be more equal, then there should be an inclusion of different kind of people, yeah? There should be inclusion of women, inclusion of LGBTIQ person, inclusion of, you know, disabilities, people with disabilities and etc. in the development, no, even not the development, the design first, the planning, the design, the development, the adoption, the adaptation of technology. If we have that, if we have people represented in all the area or aspect of this technology, then probably we can talk about technology that will benefit everyone. Yeah. Otherwise, then no. But then how we can get there? We've been pushing, we've been encouraging girls to study technology, right? But still, well, although there's an increased number of girls going to, you know, IT schools or university, but it's still like we need more. Compared to the boys going to you know, technology or STEM schools, women are still very low in terms of the number. And how that happened? Because it started from home, from school in early age. I think women don't have a good relationship with technology. It's not by nature, but it's by design. Because when we are a kid, when all of us are kids, yeah, boys and girls are taught differently. When the father needs to fix the car, they take the sons. Yeah, all of the machineries, anything related to machines, related to grease, boys. And the girls, cooking, like tidy up the house, around the house, or work around the house. Even in Indonesia, we have vocational school, yeah, SMK, right? Food and beverage equal, men and boys and girls. But then computer science, mostly men. Engineering, mostly men, mostly boys. The girls, it's basic accountant, and then now they have fashion and makeup. So there's, because skills, knowledge are also gendered since, and then and that's being thought since we were a kid. Then this is also the contributions factor why it is hard to encourage girls to go to study STEM. Yeah? Because we don't really have that good relationship with technology. So I think if we want to start, the fight to include as many women, as many marginalized people within the technology ecosystem, there's this homework that we need to do, is to really break the political, social, and cultural barrier that keep women away from STEMs, especially from digital technology, because we know this is important, because our life is heading towards that, towards living in full digital technology. So this is one of I think the important concrete way that we can do, but it also women, there's also statistic where women who work in the tech industry, a lot of them are dropped out because of how toxic and masculine, that ecosystem, that environment. I think that is also need to be addressed. We have lots of girls going to study STEM, but when they go to work in the industry, then they dropped out because, again, of all of those social, political, and cultural barriers that women often have to face even in the job that they work in. I think those are some of the practical or concrete that I would love to see in the near future.
Great, thanks. So then it's a lot about changing attitudes and structures within society. And you spent a lot of time now talking on the upbringing of children and what we teach children, or what we assume about what they can and cannot, or want and don't want to do. And then at the end, you were also alluding to, even if you can do it, and even if you want to it, you might be discouraged by some of the behavior you meet then in the schools or online, and maybe you could expand a bit more about that, because that's something also we talked about more earlier today, and seems like one of the main challenges really of our times, and that's the online gender-based violence. How would you describe that problem, and what can be done about that? What is it that women who are online, who writes maybe about feminist issues, what is it that they face?
Okay. Yeah, online gender-based violence, it happens since the internet exists for the majority of the people, of population in the world. But it's just people don't recognize it as violence back then. Because the way we see and define violence, the way we look at violence is women getting beaten up, right? Have bruises and blood, example. Other than that, that's not violence. Remember back then, even psychological violence were not considered as violence. So I can imagine, I know where people coming from when they said that what happened online, violence that happened online is not violence, because people cannot see the tangible effect of it. right? And people back then also saw it as a consequence that everyone who are online actually experience. You know, bullying, men got bullied online too, right? But then one thing that we forgot, that in that experience between men and women online, there is a difference. There is a unique characteristic of violence experience or bullying, when what people call it bullying online towards women. It is always because they are being attacked or bullied. It's not because of their opinion, but it is because they're women, because they're girls, because they're gay, because they're lesbian, because they're trans. And it always attack our bodies. It doesn't matter what is your argument, what is your opinion, they don't attack that. They attack our body. It is because we're women. It is because our especially if it's also because our sexual identities or gender identities. So that is why, you know, it isn't on. It needs to be recognized and acknowledged as online gender-based violence. So it is new, and it is not a standalone violence. Yeah, that is also why people don't recognize it back then. Is because they don't see the connection between online violence against women and violence against women. You know, gender-based violence that happen in physical spaces. While it is very much connected, it has the same root problem. It is patriarchy. It is the entitlement of a certain gender over other gender. Yeah. It is because of that sexism. It is because of the misogynism. It's the same. And also, even directly, it's very connected. When it happens online, it could also happen offline, even before it happened or after. You know what I mean, right? So it could happen offline first, and then it's extended to online, or the other way around. And now people started to see it in the last 5 years, especially in the last 2.5 years, because of the pandemic, because of the number of cases skyrocketed. It's not only in Indonesia, it's recorded all over the world. I would be really interested to hear from the Swedish experience. Because in Indonesia this year, Komnas Perempuan published the annual report and said that reported cases of OGBV is 1,721 cases. And PurpleCode also, with task force, national task force of OGBV, very new initiative, only last year, received 170 reports from women. So it is very serious. If you want women to participate online, then this also needs to be addressed. But we are not talking about which one we need to address first, right? It's not like a chicken or the egg first. We need to do it together. All the aspects that hinder women's rights online should be addressed at the same time. That's why we cannot do it together alone. We have to build this network and solidarity, and that technology can also help us to connect and to build solidarity within, women, men in Indonesia, but it also with women, men, activists from other countries as well. As we see how inspiration coming out from other movement, BLM, Me Too campaign, and then also in the region, there's a milk tea movement. There's all inspiring for us, right? And also the Arab Spring, for example. I think that's, that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you so much. I want to bring Nadja in now again. We've left you hanging online for a long while. No. It's good. I think there's a lot for Nadja to comment on here. Really on anything that you like. But if you can, as I was asking Dhyta before, to go into maybe some ideas or examples of concrete action. For example, what is Sida doing? What are you trying? What initiatives are you trying to support? What do you feel is are the key issues to work with here? And maybe if you want to comment on what Dhyta was saying on the online gender-based violence as well, what you can see, if you actually have any figures from Sweden or internationally, where the trend's going, and what seems to be the key to address that issue.
Yeah, well, firstly, I have to say it's so interesting to listen to you, Dhyta, and I agree with so much of what you have said. This far, let's see if there's anything that I can add. So gender-based violence online, I don't have any concrete figures, but I know that it's increasing, and that the pandemic, since it kind of created a rapid development of the digitalisation globally, we also saw how gender-based violence also increasingly moved online. And it's been very visible, and it's quite well documented. There's a Swedish organization, for example, called Kvinna till Kvinna, that has reported quite extensively on this. So it's beyond doubt that it's a big problem, and that there's something that we see, and this is something that women human rights defenders see a lot. And to tag on to what you were saying about how women are usually attacked to their bodies, there's the special rapporteur on freedom of expression released a report last year on gender-based violence online, actually. So I can greatly recommend a read of that, Irene Khan. But she was raising how defamation campaigns, so gender disinformation is becoming, I mean, we've seen this for a long time, but this is really a thing where sort of disinformation is spread about women who are speaking out, or just any girl or woman who is in a society. For example, there's an example of a women's rights activist in Azerbaijan whose bedroom became surveyed through camera surveillance and recorded. And then the videos were used to blackmail her. And I mean, that's a very, very intrusive example of how gender-based violence online can look, right? But there's a lot of examples around different types of gender disinformation, so straight up lies and hate campaigns and smearing, but also documentations of someone's life. And since women's lives usually are policed through a number of cultural and social norms and codes, some of these things can be very dangerous for someone if the information is shared and taken out of their hands. So that's a little on gender-based violence. How is Sida working on? Well, one of the most important things is to sort of support and protect the people who are working on these issues. So support to women's rights activists, women's rights movement. An independent women's rights or feminist movement is the single most important factor to contribute to a progressive policy development. So this is very important. So wherever you are or wherever you do, make sure that you tap into your local women's rights organizations or movements and ask them about their experiences, their needs, how can they contribute, and what's their analysis or take on a certain situation. And this can be applied to any issue or any sector, because to change the norms that sort of guide and guard our lives so that we can so women can become more involved in digital or in natural science or in the STEM sort of area, we need to make sure that those who are pushing the boundaries of that are included, so that it's easier to sort of lead that pathway to change. So support your women's rights movement and include women and girls in everything that you do, really. And I made this point earlier, but the support to women's rights movements and women and girls is also to support sort of their or our efforts to build the new realities, to put our imaginations and our creativity into new networks and products and digital innovations that can grow, become to scale. And I think that's the only way in the end that we're going to have alternatives to the digital innovations and solutions that we have today. But that requires a lot of support to women's rights activists and the movement, as well as sort of Sida is working on, for example, increased access, because there's still a lot of people, and most of them are women, that are still not connected to the internet or don't have the devices that can help them to do that. So this is huge, of course. It's almost, I think it's, this is the first year, or last year was the first year where more people in the world actually are connected than not. So I think it hit sort of 51% internet access, but 49% offline is still many people. So Sida is working with the sort of telecom companies to increase that type of access, but we also need much more efforts to make sure that the sort of skills are theirs and the norms and attitudes that you were raising the issue around women's relationship to technology. And I think that's really important, because more men than women seem to think that just mobile technology, for example, is not as relevant to them. This is a barrier also to use. So we need to get more women online and into these spaces and support that through educational initiatives and through supporting families and changing norms. So that's around the increased access. Sida works, for example, with Association for Progressive Communication, APC, and supporting them in building community networks. And APC also has a great women's rights program where they have campaigned for women in technology for a long time now. So we support that. They build community networks, which is an alternative way of ensuring access. And then one really important area when it comes to gender-based online violence is that so many of the actors that sort of own the digital space are private sector actors. And I think there's a big case for pushing further on the efforts to regulate social media and digital platforms when it comes to human rights impact. And there's some work being done in this. I'm mostly familiar with the work that is being done in Europe around human rights due diligence. It comes from the human rights and business principles that the UN has worked with for a long time, but I think we really need to make this into regulation rather than efforts that the companies can do if they want to. So I think that's a really important piece to work on. Human rights due diligence for social media platforms. And then, of course, there's the economy, where Sida is trying to leverage funds to people and organizations that aren't as well represented, so that they can be a part of the conversation and be a part of the digital development through their innovation and thinking. So that's a few examples of kind of more concrete things that Sida is supporting. Yes, I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nadja, both for those examples and for putting things a bit into perspective. Also, we tend to forget all those people that are still not online and what gaps that creates, of course. Thank you again so much. I have a lot of questions left on my paper and in my head. Things keep popping up, but we're also entering into the last half hour of this conversation. So I would like to give the opportunity for people in the audience, both in the room and online, to address any question you like to Dhyta or Nadja. I don't know, Natasha, do we have any questions online already? Belum. Okay. Well, we'll allow for some time for our online participants to come in, and then, well, in the room, just hands up anyone who wishes to ask a question. We have two here. Should we take them? Yes, we'll take both questions, and then I'll leave for you to answer. So our friend in the front row, if we can pass the mic to you. Let's see, can we get a camera on you? Well, you can sit down or stand up or whatever you like, but maybe introduce yourself and then your question.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Faisal. I'm from Sukabumi, West Java. And I have a question for you both. I would like to know again about what feminism is, because that, like, as you both say that, what I know that feminism is about that the women can do everything, including men's work. Is that the purpose? Because like an example in Sukabumi, in my area, that there are a lot of industries, and mostly there are the workers are women, and even in the office, in the production, mostly there are women, men. Is that the purpose of it? But I'm not gonna blame it, okay? Because my mom works as a head of school. Of course, that maybe that's the purpose of the feminism. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. And if we can pass the mic down the line for the next question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Rahmi. I'm from Wikimedia Indonesia. So I would like to ask a question to Mbak Dhyta. What types of approach that are suitable to be applied, especially in Indonesia, to include more women and girls? Because if we see that this is a lot of issues intersect together to create the that cause the inequality of the participation of women. Like, for example, maybe as just like a simple example, maybe there are a lot of women who do not own like gadgets because of the financial independence issues that women suffer, and also maybe like the internet issues across Indonesia. There are still like a lot of regions that are not covered by the internet connection. So women and girls suffer from these issues as well to access the internet. So what kinds of approach that's best to to be applied in Indonesia to include more women and girls and to represent them, especially on on this digital era on the internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we'll start with those two questions and pass the floor to Dhyta first, and to address both the question directed straight at you, and also then the broader question to both of you about what feminism actually is.
What is feminism? It takes a semester to explain it. No, but you know what you said, actually one of the example of practice of feminism. But feminism is not just about how women can do whatever men can. That's just one thing. But feminism is about challenging the power structures. And power structures is not just about gender. Gender is just one of them, right? So that men and women and other gender can be equal. that hetero people and gay or lesbian can also be equal. Yeah, the people with higher class and lower class can be also equal. That the government, those people who have the mandate to hold power as a government, and the people, us, the common people, can also be equal. So those are power structures that feminists are working to challenge, that everyone gets the same opportunity, everyone gets the same rights, everyone treated equally. Yeah. So it's not just about gender, that women can do what men can. That's just one example. But feminism fight or works for equality for basically everyone. Yeah, that's the simple way I can put it out. I hope that can answer. And salute for your mother as a principal in school. And I know that is not an easy thing to do in Indonesia, especially if you are from a smaller town than Jakarta, right? So give my regards to your mother. She's great. So the second question, what type of approach that is suitable, right? To include women and other marginalized community people, right? I think Nadja has already mentioned, because now that if we're talking about connectivity to the internet, we rely on corporation, companies to provide us with that community, that connectivity, right? So there's a lot of initiative, in the world actually, to start thinking about community networks, where that networks is being built and also managed by local communities, so that we don't depend on these big companies that have profits in their mind. Yeah. That is one thing. But again, I think we also Nadja also mentioned that is not enough. Building infrastructure only is not enough. Because if this is, for example, some organizations, big organization, and also even company like Google has had an initiative of giving away computers and smartphones to women and girls in rural areas in Africa and India. And that project failed. The goal is to include women and girls, to participate in these digital spaces. It failed. Because what? Because they only give a solution, technological solutions, infrastructure solution. Because what happened then, that computer and that smartphones that they were given to the women, the mothers and the girls, were basically being dominated by the men in the family, taken away and used by the men. So there is this, a social and cultural, barriers that we also need to work on instead of just building infrastructure. But I also want to add, beside infrastructure and connectivity, which is now become the rights, right? Our human rights. Our rights is that everyone can connect to or access the internet. But I think we also need to be careful with that. Access should not just means that everyone can have access to the internet, but it should mean that everyone can get access, whatever that is in the internet, without the access to the internet. So it's basically, if we have the right to connect, we also have the right not to connect. And when we decide that we don't want to be connected to the internet, as a citizen, we need to have the same opportunities as those who are connected to the internet. So that is also one of the topics and work that PurpleCode is going to work on access. But we want to look at from the feminist angles, from feminist perspective, that is not rely on infrastructure, the big towers, and people can get connectivity even in the small or remote areas. But how we have access to whatever that human being or citizen needs to access with or without internet connection. I hope that answer your questions.
It answered them excellently, apparently, judging from the reactions in the room. Thank you so much. Let's bring in Nadja as well. I hope you heard the first question, Nadja, that was posed to both of you to reason a bit about what feminism is, actually. And if you want to comment on the second question, which was maybe more about an Indonesian context, please do so as well.
So what is feminism? I mean, that's a big a philosophical question. And I think feminism is about believing in equal rights for women and men. And it's also about taking action in that direction. So not everything that a woman does is feminist, of course, and not every woman is a feminist. I think, so that is not something that it comes by default, right? I think there needs to be some sort of action orientation in the direction of expansion of women human rights and human rights, something that has the intention and possibility to expand rights and freedom within that. So of course, feminists can do a lot of things that aren't necessarily feminist. I don't know about you guys. In Sweden, there's a big conversations around like whether or not it's feminist to have plastic surgery or do like have beauty injections. And I think that's kind of derailing the conversation from the real issues. It doesn't really matter. You can discuss the beauty industry and beauty norms, that's one thing, but the important issues are more around the economy and violence. And I think that's in the direction where we're really expanding human rights and freedom for women and girls, for non-binary people, and for everyone, for men as well. Feminism is not about a totalitarian version of the world where women become the bad examples of authoritarian rule instead of men. That's not feminism. And feminism is also not about being only women or separatists, although there is can be a good function for separatistic organization to create safe spaces for women and girls and non-binary people to organize and feel safe. Because in a lot of spaces where women and non-binary people are, they usually have to guard against or take care not to break social norms and behave in certain ways just to be safe. So separatism can be an effective way of organizing to further women and girls' safety in order to achieve gender equality. But it's not the sort of end goal of it, if you ask me. So a lot around expansion of human rights and women's rights, I think, is important when you talk about what feminism is. I don't have so much to add to what Dhyta said around the context in Indonesia. I did look at some data on Indonesia to prepare a little bit for this conversation. And I couldn't find all that much with the sort of short notice, but the gender gap was mostly around how, and I mentioned that already, that more women than men think that the internet is not relevant for them, or internet mobile devices has less relevant for women than men. Southeast Asia as a whole has actually a quite small gender gap when it comes to connectivity. I think it's the smallest in the world, actually. It's down to a couple of percentages. But of course, there's big differences between the countries and regions where the gender gap is larger in Indonesia than, for example, in China, where there pretty much isn't any. So that's a little bit around the context that I can share.
Thanks so much to both of you. I think we have time for one more round of questions from the floor. If anyone, yes, we have two hands coming up here. Perfect, in the second row. So let's take both of them.
Okay, so hello, my name is Elita. And yes, I just have a question because it comes from your, for Miss Dita, it just from your statement, and honestly speaking, it was like quite powerful. So I just would like to know regarding the communal movement. Okay, so I have a question like, how effective is it with the communal movement in affecting government or decision making for establishing law or regulation for patronage or protection for women? Sometimes when we express several ideas or something that might suppress or oppress government or power, we have some kind of consequences. So how effective is it for the communal to be united and can affect government in establishing the regulation? And also, you just also remind me about, like women's, and especially if they are being the victim of rape and harassment. Sometimes when they, when they are in social media or something, they can get the the victim blaming from the user there. So I just would like to know, is there any comment from you regarding this one? So yes, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think my question is slightly related to her questions. I saw there are some government-based policy in European countries to promote the LGBT and people with disabilities in workforce and workplaces. So do you think there are possibilities to implement that in Indonesia? Not in near future, of course, but in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shall we pass the mic back to Dita?
I'd like to call what you said. You were saying communal movement. Yeah. Yes. I usually call it. It's the same. It's a collective movement, and movement needs to be communal. Needs to be collective. And if not, it's not. It's not called movement. Yeah. So it is very important. Collective movement to create or to build a collective power, and that is what we need if we want to influence, or basically, if I want to say a bit harsh, to tell the government what they need to do. Yeah, because like in Indonesia, we talk about that we are a democratic country, that the people are the one who holds power, but that's not the reality, no? And then, but that is because we don't have that power as people if we are not being united, no? So that is why collective movement is important, to build a collective power to tell the government what they need to do. Yeah, and whether or not it's effective, I think we can see from the history. The history speaks for itself. During the Suharto era, right, 32 years, and Suharto can be brought down, even, of course, with all of the problems around it, by the people's power, by that collective power, right? And then, let's say, like the most recent history, it's not history, it's happening, is about the Undang-Undang TPKS, Tindak Pidana Kekerasan Seksual. 10 years we've been fighting for that. And in the recent years, when a lot of people, not just activists, not just NGOs, started to talk about it on social media, there's a pressure to the government to say, hey, the people want this. And then they passed it 2 months ago, right? So believe in that collective power and work on it so that we can together overcome all of these problems in Indonesia, not only inequalities between gender, but also, other discriminations that is being experienced by other marginalized communities. which would bring me to the second question, LGBT, whether or not I will see it's happening in Indonesia in the future. Not near future, you said. I hope it's in the near future. But as a nation, we don't see any other option. We don't see any other option. It will happen someday, if we believe it will happen. Like, listen, this acceptance towards LGBTIQ was non-existent 50 years ago in any parts of the world. But it's happening now. Even same-sex marriage happens in a lot of countries now. Indonesia is not there yet. We are not fighting for same-sex marriage yet. But the acceptance of towards LGBTIQ communities will happen, because this nation, this country will not have any other choice but to do that. If we want to be a nation, if we want to be a people that really uphold human rights. And that is not depending on the government. It depends on us. It depends on us, especially young people, no? Like, right now, there's a lot of members of society, peoples are against LGBTIQ because they have this old way of thinking. And who will have the new way of thinking? The young people. The young people who start, like some of you probably very young, or young people, I'm still young, my age, who start to have kids, right? I don't have kids, but my friends have kids, who can start to teach their kids, right? Even younger generation, about acceptance, not just tolerance, acceptance towards others, respecting human rights. I think we have a future. Let's believe, and let's hope, and let's work on that. Let's fight for it. That's it for me.
Thank you so much. That's a powerful message to sort of go out with, because I think we're approaching the end of this session. We'll try to keep the time as much as we can. I want to give the floor maybe then one last time to Nadja, if you would like to comment on any of these questions, even though they were very Indonesia specific, or if there's anything else you would like to bring up that hasn't been said yet, or if I might throw a question in there for you if you'd like to address it. What do you take away as the main points from this conversation? So Nadja, in maybe no more than 2 minutes from Stockholm. Sorry for that challenge.
That's all right. I think, well, firstly, just to address the question, I think the first person also raised, what do we do around threats on social media? And that face sort of women and girls a lot. And I was speaking about a little bit earlier, the kind of push to regulate social media platforms on human rights due diligence. That's one way of making them accountable for how they moderate content on their platforms. And of course, this is not easy at an individual level to start working on this. So I'm going to tag that onto what you were just saying around organizing together. So I think support each other and organize and believe in your own imagination and creativity, and support each other. And I think that's the only way we can push and move things, right? And I think that's really the most important things that we can do together as well. Gustav, what was the question that you raised?
My question would be, what are your main takeaways from this conversation today?
Yeah, okay. So I think that is my main takeaway from that. If there's anything like a message and something that we can do at an individual level. to support each other and believe in and start creating alternative realities. I mean, these big companies like Facebook was created by college boys who wanted to rate girls on their looks. I mean, it obviously wasn't created with the intention to do what it was doing today. And maybe there's a little surprise that so many of these platforms aren't really user-friendly to many of us. That's why it's so important to try and create something differently and support each other in doing that, and asking your governments and international actors and governments such as Sida in support in doing that.
Thank you so much. That will have to be almost a concluding remark of this afternoon. I feel it says in my script that I should conclude and sum up. That feels difficult and also premature. It feels like the conversation has only gotten started. Of course, we're part of a bigger conversation that has been going on for a while and will have to go on for a while. And some of my main takeaways from this is what the things that you both just said about believing in the cause and taking it further jointly to support each other and addressing all these different fronts at the same time. It seems clear that there's no one issue that we can work on only, but it's a multi-front struggle in that sense. But more of a summing up, I don't think I can do, more than perhaps say that it feels like we at least we achieved the ambition of this democracy talk as such, to share experiences and ideas and move further together in that regard. I hope that was useful for all of you sitting here in the room and everyone listening in at home, everyone hopefully listening in afterwards as we put this webinar online. Thank you so much to Dhyta for coming here, sharing your thoughts and ideas and experiences. Thank you so much to Nadja for joining from the early morning in Sweden. Thanks to everyone who was here and who listened in. Thanks to Bahasa Global for pulling this together technically. I'm really impressed that it actually worked. So thank you so much for that. And let's hope that this is not then the end of the conversation, but part of it or a starting point. And I hope we can continue talking about and addressing these issues together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
There is time